So it's been a while since I've recorded any of these videos. I've really been researching and working with an area of focus that's under-recognized, I think, in at least the professional communities and wider audience of people involved in understanding psychology. And that has to do with the schizoid position. So just to define that a little bit more, drawing from Fairbirn, who looked at sort of 4 primary schizoid typologies: schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, kind of the psychotic disorders, sociopathy, schizoid character, which is like the schizoid personality disorder, and then also schizoid position. And so with schizoid position, the way that I like to describe it is, imagine a banyan tree, which is a tree that has another tree growing out of it. So usually a fig growing out of another base. And in the literature on the schizoid position, people like Fairbirn and Gumtrip would discuss the formation of a personality structure that acts in a way to relate to other people in the outside world, even though there may be something very, very core, something very central to a very early infantile way of being in the world that's fundamentally unrelated to objects, that even dwells in a world where objects, as in other people, are expected to be persecutory. And the rage and the fear and panic that come from not really having the needs for self-regulation met, they can, you don't know if it's coming from the outside or the inside, Is the rage going outward actually rage being directed at the self? At this level of organization, there's not that kind of differentiation between self and others. So the anger and the fear, they're just sort of amorphously blended into an experience of being what I believe it was Guntrip called the abandoned baby on the hill, which in a therapeutic sense with adults might feel like that. Might feel like an enormous, vast, and terrifying ocean that the more central personality really tries not to feel. There can be anxieties and other types of defensive structures that are sort of built on top to help the person secure themselves from falling into this underlying kind of formlessness and fragmentation. So sometimes when we look and we see, something that looks like a narcissistic or a borderline or an obsessive compulsive, or an oral personality structure, that's present in the person's defenses. Somebody really needs things to be orderly in just this right way, but instead of it being about control and over-disciplining and these voices of figures that are overly disciplining them, it's actually a way of holding life together so as not to feel this other thing, because the self is really, in this sense, at least the divide in the self is strong enough to be really pressing from underneath. And this looks different in, I think, narcissism, that has a much more schizoid component than when it doesn't, where it can be very robust and just, boastful and, and controlling. Well, that may manifest when there's a strong kind of schizoid component to it, but you usually see a lot more disorganization. People that, if those narcissistic defenses really give way, they're going to find themselves in a state of just sheer and utter panic. This is one of the reasons I'd really like to do more video essays if I find time for it, just to show some examples of what this looks like. But that might be familiar for some of you for perhaps yourselves, or maybe more likely some people that you've known that have been either in intimate relationships, or in parent-child relationships, where underneath this kind of more narcissistic or borderline or obsessive compulsive personality, there's something in there that's really kind of really disorganized and terrifying. So now that I've hopefully not frightened you too much, but drawn attention to this, what should be recognized with the schizoid position is that there really is a divided self, and the one that's become acclimated to relationships and the world to whatever extent is very different to the abandoned baby on the hill that grew up wild. It's a really beautiful thing to think of the vastness of the cosmos, or of the of the nobility of a peaceful death, or the vastness of the ocean. These are really inspiring things. But why might they also be terrifying? Well, they're terrifying if there's something in the experience of self that we need to defend against feeling that has that level of immensity. And so you can see how a person's psychology, through dissociation of those feelings, kind of grows in this sort of incomplete way, where there's always kind of a pressure from beneath. And so in therapy with sufficient depth, for clients who are at a phase where they're sort of ready to start confronting some of this, it's really essential to recognize and to validate how unrelatable that seems. In some cases, there's a lot of anger there towards the tree that's grown on top. Like I said, the as-if personality of the schizoid, the self that operates as if it's not completely dissociated from the world, can really have a sense of self and be known by others. And yet there's this other sense of self for whom it's almost like in Jordan Peele's film, Us. It's being brought to go through all the emotions, but feeling fundamentally, relationally disconnected. Just like in that film, there can be quite a lot of anger towards the self that's oblivious to it. Or even in the end of Being John Malkovich, where, here's this child going through the world and then there's somebody trapped underneath watching it. Similar accounts have been made for certain types of narcissistic disorders, where the individual is watching their life as if it's this great, sort of drama unfolding, and there's not a real sense of personhood and ownership like there might be for somebody else. That's all signs of a schizoid position. So, what to do? What to do about this? Well, first I'd recommend some reading. I think the best introductory text to this is probably, that I found, is Jeffrey Seinfeld's The Empty Core. And if you want to move into Fairbirn, who's a large source of inspiration, he has a series of psychoanalytic essays that were published in a collection that you can find. But I'll put a link in the description. But the next part is to just recognize that this is actually a real thing. That you can be both. And if you're ready to start moving into discovering that, I recommend that it's done in a therapeutic setting with somebody who sort of understands this. it can come up in a relationship if you are high functioning enough to be able to really discuss what's coming up for you as you access dissociated states. What you'll notice is that the schizoid part's highly sensitive to rejection, highly sensitive to what R.D. Laing in his book called The Divided Self describes as being turned into an object. So if someone's having a transference reaction with you, or a real reaction with you with some of your behaviors that may be coming from your own defenses, that seems to not really fully value your experience at that time, it feels like the life and the presence and the reality of you is being sucked out. Well, that's actually not an uncommon or inconceivable thing for an infant to feel. If a caregiver is either, not really considering the infant a person with valid feelings, or is overly enmeshing, or so many other not good enough experiences of being parented. And here we move into some theoretical, differences between, say, the British and the American object relational schools of, is there parenting good enough to not feel that way at times? But what really matters is how relevant is it to your therapy or to the psychology of somebody that you're trying to understand? Because to truly connect with and work through this divide, to go from being the colonizers who've settled on the stolen lands of someone else, and I mean that both as a legacy of some of us, which may also be sort of culturally handed down in a certain packet of schizoid intergenerational trauma that's then managed through, various sociological sorts of schemata. And I know I'm being really wordy here, but what I'm trying to say is that thing that, leads some of us to be here and regarded as people in the way that we are by our parents and their ancestors going on back. In some cases, it's hard to imagine how can there not be a schizoid core given what we've been asked to overlook in the experience of human beings. And that sometimes really crops up in our own psychologies. And you can feel from both. You can feel that you really, really want connection, that you really care about somebody, that you really, that this notion of being a wild, hermit isn't exactly who you are or what you're looking to do with your life. But there may also then be a part of self that is being unrecognized as being completely left out. So anyway, this is a very brief and somewhat jagged and maybe disorganized description of such a significant topic. I'm sorry if it's not in a therapy session, just launching into this material willy-nilly can, there's so much there that to just summarize it seems a little bit, sort of hard to organize. But I trust that, for those of you for whom this description really already means something, you'll have received at least some validation from someone else who's gotten to know others and themselves to say that this divide is such a big deal that it's almost impossible to fully heal without paying it some attention, and that it's also really understandable that that attention needs to take place with the right support. And as one client mentioned in a group that I lead, people at various levels of relating to schizoid or other types of dilemmas. One patient, she said, there's an enormous difference between actually meeting this in yourself and coming to live with it, coming to develop a relationship with it, and then just knowing it intellectually. So what I'm saying right now is kind of laying the foundations for understanding this intellectually, but to go through that relational process of unostracizing, de-ostracizing the more fragmented and wild parts of the human experience. It's more than just an idea. It's a type of redemption of life's promise that was denied very early on. And so we'll explore this more, but that should suffice for